So now that we're recording, we can certainly get started officially. So partnerships with high schools, the goal of this is to have a conversation about an article that I wrote about partnerships. Now, what I came up with and what I have done may not work for everybody, but the idea is to be a little bit general in the sense that there are a lot of opportunities to work with high schools, and ultimately, hopefully it can benefit, or something will come out of this where you say, aha, well, maybe I haven't done that, or I could do that. Let's see if I can minimize this. So the first part that I want to address is this idea of the role of faculty. So very often, when we're on the college campus and we're working in our different roles, and this is my experience, I'm not sure if it's your experience, but faculty don't necessarily feel that it's their responsibility to recruit students. Now, this is different depending on where you are in the world. Sometimes it's built into your role, but there are plenty of my colleagues through the years that have said, you know, admissions does what they do. I do what I do. My job is to teach the students. You get me the students, you bring me the students, I teach the students. And my approach is very different. I believe in this idea of line of sight, which is that every person on the campus, faculty, staff, alumni, people that have something to do with the campus, we all have a shared responsibility. Even the students, to some degree, have a shared responsibility in attracting students to the campus. It's not just about recruitment, but it's also about retention, et cetera. So this can get a little dicey at times, because at the same time, you might have admissions people who are saying, you know what, it is not your job, it is my job to recruit students and get out of our stuff. So in this, I would argue that we should complement the efforts by admissions, because the reality is, while they're representing the entire institution, we are representing our particular program. And it doesn't matter if it's HTM or business or recreation or English or child study. We know more about our programs than admissions does, or should, I guess. If we are operating at a very high level and the program's been in existence for a while, it's not a bad idea to meet with admissions on a regular basis and make sure that they have everything that they need to best represent the program. But still, they're also, you know, there's only so much bandwidth. So one of the approaches is to make yourself available and to say, look, we want to work with you. We want to work with enrollment management and complement what you do. If you're going to do a college fair at a school that is a partner for us, that is a feeder for us, then let's talk about it. So that's one thing that I just want to put out there, because not every campus operates the same way. And admissions sometimes is very turf based. And sometimes you have faculty that don't want to do it. So if you're in a department with a lot of faculty members that are teaching hospitality and tourism, they may not all get this. And so part of this conversation is, how do we get to that point where we're all trying to bring in students in some way? So making contact. How do you connect with these high schools? So there's just a couple things that I'm going to share. And by all means, if you have something you want to throw in that works for you, please do so. This is supposed to be interactive, not just me talking at you. When I came to my institution 4 years ago, I was lucky in the sense that we had some relationships with some high schools. But really what helped the most is that I found my way into my first commission meeting for the Culinary Tourism Hospitality DOE. So they do these commission meetings every so often. We actually have one tomorrow, virtually, of course. And by going to that, I met different members of high schools. That was real easy. In other instances, I also met high schools through our Convention and Visitors Bureau, or at least what acts as that in Brooklyn, which is the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce, and they had a tourism committee. And so basically the point here is, in terms of first contact, in terms of making contact with different high schools, you have to hustle a little bit. You have to reach out to organizations that are already doing it, that are already communicating with high schools, and partner as much as possible. Luckily, because I'm on the commission and I'm an active part of the commission, the person who leads it gives me their contact list, their updated contact list. Actually, it's just a Google sheet that is always updated on their end. So I always have the contacts for their CTE person, their work-based learning person, their principal, their assistant principals, their guidance counselors. So I have a means by which I can reach out. Now, I add to that by reaching out to other high schools that may not be part of that DOE collective. And so what I've done is, through one of my student workers, is they've gone out and they've collected contact information for high schools within all the 5 boroughs. And periodically, I will invite them to different things that we're doing, with the idea that maybe at some point that they will come in. But the reality is, unless you have a warm introduction, unless you meet them face to face, they're probably not going to engage. And so you have to find ways to make that happen. You can do that a little bit through LinkedIn. You can do that through people that you know at your own institution that may have worked in high schools before. Oh, we have an alum that's at this place. Can we reach out? I've actually worked through some of my former students that have grown into teachers and administrators at some of the high schools in New York City. And so they've been great contacts, and it grows over time. You can also work through organizations like CCAP and NAF, and there's many others, DECA, depending on where you are, to find those people. But let's talk about that relationship. So when we talk about working with the high schools, it really is about mutual benefit. So what is it that you can do to help them? And obviously, in turn, they can send you students, but the focus really needs to be on what it is that you can do to lighten their load, as I say. Okay, so, well, that's a good question, Cheryl. When I say lighten the load, if you work with high school students at all, if you talk to them, they have 1,000 bosses and all these directives coming from either it's the DOE, board of directors, some other agency, the federal government. There's a lot of demands on them. And so they don't have the bandwidth sometimes to create those learning opportunities that we can potentially create. Now, granted, there's 17 of us that are in this call right now. We all have different lives. We all have different demands. We may have, especially now, kids at home, different things that are pulling us away from maybe the core things that we're supposed to do. Where are we going to find time to lighten the load of a high school colleague? The biggest thing that they need from us, honestly, is programming and something that their students can work on. And the question is really good. And the way that I would flip it is to say, in conversation with them, what do you need? Because one teacher at one high school needs something maybe a little bit different than the next teacher. They will communicate that in different ways. And I'll give you one example. During one of our big events on campus, I think it was this showcase multicultural program that we did with MFHA. One of the teachers pulled me aside and said, this is really great. Our students had a great time, but you know what they really need? They need interview help. which is not HTM, but it was clearly communicated that their students who were trying to get internships and trying to get jobs did not feel comfortable and confident to go through an interview process. And so we designed a program called Interview 360. And the whole idea was to do basically speed dating style interview practice with alumni and other people. And it allowed us to partner with career services in the alumni office. And we gave them interview skills, mock interviews. So a lot of this is really not, I made the mistake my first year coming up with programs and saying, hey, we have this for you, this is great. And it worked to some extent, but you really have to flip it. You really have to go to them and say, hey, Letitia, what is it that you need from us? What would make your life better? And that's really how I would certainly answer that. We are in a very unique position because of our situation where we're an attractive destination for high schools, for field trips, for attending events, college readiness tours, etc. So we can provide that basically on a silver platter to different high schools. And depending on where we are, there was a time where St. Joe's, we would actually send buses to high schools to pick them up, but we just don't have that capability anymore. What we generally do is we coordinate for them to come on, and we have a spot for their bus to park, or we make it really easy for them to come in on public transportation, and then we take care of everything once they get here. But I'll talk a little bit more about that afterwards. So I just mentioned college readiness. Every program that we do that high school students can participate in is 49% recruitment. So everything we do, whether it's a fancy foods thing or a cooking knife skills thing, or tourism abroad thing, whatever it is, if we get them on campus or if we go to them and do the program at their school, it's 49% recruitment. Everything we do is 49% recruitment. College readiness specifically is an opportunity to focus on one particular high school, get them on campus, expose them to the facilities, let them see the energy of the campus, and really get to interact with financial aid, bursar, registrar, student life, different aspects of campus. What we generally do for college readiness for St. Joe's is we set up a tour of campus, we set up a presentation with admissions, we set up a little bit of time with financial aid. Sometimes we put in on a few other components if that's what the teacher, the guidance counselor has asked for. But probably the best thing, and this is something that I would encourage everyone to do, is to make sure that they have one-on-one time with real students, with your students that are in the program, away from you, because they're not always comfortable asking the questions that they really want to ask. What is it like to be here? I'm a Muslim student. Am I going to be comfortable here? What's the social scene like? All those kinds of questions. Can't do that in a formal presentation necessarily if it's given by admissions. So college readiness tours are great if you can get them. My belief is that the more often that you can get students on campus, the more likely that they're going to come to campus and enroll. And that's going to be different for every one of us in terms of how we operate. But that college readiness approach is pretty helpful. Internships. So because of our interactions with industry, because of the work that we do from a research perspective, because of the work that we're doing with our students that interacts with industry, we have an opportunity to pass that on to our high school colleagues. Now, some of you may be saying, I have a hard enough time getting internships for my students. Why am I going to worry about the high schools. But this goes back to this idea of mutual benefit. What are some of the things that you can do to help your high school colleagues? And then in turn, there's that goodwill, and they're going to always keep your institution front of mind when that student is looking for a college, they're looking for a degree. And so where possible, you can partner and become that clearinghouse, so to speak, for internship opportunities. Now, granted, CCAP, NAF, DECA, et cetera, a lot of organizations exist that are already providing high school opportunities. And that's basically a big part of their business, is to be able to provide those internships. But they're not always as successful as they want to be or need to be. Sometimes they struggle because they don't necessarily have the relationships that we have collectively with restaurants and hotels and travel agencies and cruise lines, et cetera. And so we can bridge that gap. We can become more ingrained in terms of what they do in terms of setting up those internships. Now, not every site, not every business is going to be willing to host a high school student as an intern, but maybe they will, depending on the kind of thing that they need to do. I've spent the last few months or a couple months retooling our internship process to be 100% remote for some of our students. And so that just goes, gets to a conversation. And what I figured out along the way is that I could probably get a couple of high school students into some of these internships if I needed to or wanted to. That has not been communicated to me. None of my high school partners have said, we really need this, but maybe we could. And so it never hurts to provide another opportunity to our high school colleagues because they struggle. And a lot of those internships are really important to what they do from a work-based learning Perkins approach. So I'll leave it there. Oh, and I will add that in some instances, I've actually taken on high school interns at St. Joe's. I've had 9 over the last 18 months. And it was a neat experience because it got us closer in terms of working with the high schools. And they did some real work, and they helped put on the events or plan the events, actually put on the events that we were actually putting together for their classmates at different high schools. So it was a nice 360-degree approach. I'll give you an example. They helped put together one of our etiquette dinners, and then they were some of the wait staff along with our college students basically managing the etiquette dinner. And so they had a great experience, got to, rub elbows with alumni and got to do something that they had never done before. And some of them have provided feedback that was one of the neatest experiences they had ever had, because they're still young and they weren't old enough to work in certain places. And now they got a little bit of practical experience. So never a bad thing. All right. So HTM programming, and I'm only just going to touch on this a little bit, but there are a number of programs that you can do, and I'll just run through a couple of them because I want to get into some more interaction. But I like to put on programs, obviously in communication with the high schools, try to pull stuff out of what they're looking for. But I like to do programs that are on the fringe, meaning areas of hospitality and tourism that are not being addressed enough, areas of hospitality and tourism that are a little bit more interesting. So I'll come back to that, Elizabeth. So one of the programs we did was Not So Scary Foods, which was all about plant-based, alternative insects, etc. And this is before the big wave of, Impossible Burger, etc. And so this was a very attractive, you have to put yourself in the minds of a high school student, which is easier for some of us than others. But basically, what is something that's going to freak out the students a little bit and really put them on edge and really make it exciting for them if possible. And so we basically reached out to people in the industry that are, grinding up crickets and turning it into powder. We reached out to somebody who is a fine dining chef who specializes in insects. We found somebody through somebody else that works at the museum and has insects around them all the time, and we put this program together, and we brought in 100 students or so from 7 different high schools, and they had a blast. And so what are those things that are on the cutting edge that can provide something exciting for the students, to give them a real reason to get off campus? You not only do you have to convince the high school students, but you also have to convince, probably more importantly, teachers, the administrators, the guidance counselors. And so that's led to a number of different programs. And then I'll add another layer to this. Because of the way that things work, depending on where you are, there needs to be a certain amount of information that's communicated so that the students can do a write-up about the person that they met. So from a Perkins perspective, and you can look up Perkins if you're not familiar with CTE and all that, there are certain guidelines in terms of what qualifies for hours that the students can earn for doing different things. And I went to a CTE conference locally, in New York, so that I could understand it a little bit better. And basically what I found is that if you put on certain events and provide enough information about the panelists, then you're equipping the teachers to be able to give that information to the students. They're more likely to participate because they can actually earn hours. And so there's little ways to do that. For example, on Friday this week, we're doing our spring symposium, all virtual, a Nightlife Academy. And what I've done, and I'm going to do it again after this, is I've sent updates of the panelists with a bio, headshot, information about them, so that they can turn around and give it to their students so that they can do their write-ups. And so that is a good approach for programming as well. As if you're going to do something that talks about the different roles in industry, you can provide a lot of information about the people that are going to be the panelists, the speakers, etc. So was that high school internship opportunity provided a paid internship? Yes. So DOE has worked through NAF and I'm forgetting the name of the new organization, but it doesn't matter. DOE has the money. Okay, DOE has the money, and basically they reached out to me through NAF to say, hey, we have the money to pay them, we just need sites for the students. So there are programs in place, and there's a lot of funding that I've been learning more and more about coming from the federal government to support CTE, and that turns into money to pay for internships for high school students. Okay. All right. Any questions at this point? I've just been talking.
Hey, Damien, it's Jennifer.
Hi, Jennifer.
So I have a question. So we have some of our area high schools, and I go into a couple of them, present about the program, talk about the industry, take a couple students or whatever, but I have a really hard time, how do you get past the gatekeeper, if you will, to either try to get the students to the school or, get into more high schools. That's the problem I have, that, we don't have time, we have to, the only time you can come is lunch, right? So, what's kind of some strategies to get around that?
Honestly, I've approached that a little bit differently depending on the school. Usually when I go to the schools, and actually that's in the next section, I usually go when they invite me. I don't find times to go in. I don't know if that makes any sense. Like I get brought in to do Nocti judging, to do judging for cooking contests. I'll come in and I'll do guest teaching. So I really just work through the individual teachers and say, I just put myself out there and say, is there an opportunity? Would it be helpful if I were to come in and do a presentation for your students? And basically that allows them, it goes back to the lightening their load. Can you come in and do a segment that they need to teach, and then they can sit in the back and just relax for a second? So that's usually the approach that I take. I've gotten to the point where the high school, the assistant principals and the principals know me enough that if I are ever to reach out, they're gonna make it work so that I can come in. But it's really the teachers. The teachers are the gatekeepers, and as long as you have a good relationship with them, they're going to invite you to come in rather than you requesting to come in. I don't know if that was helpful. Sorry. Any other? Okay, Jeff. Have you ever tried teaching an intro type course? Oh yeah. So at the high schools, you great segue as well. So there's a couple different things that you can do to get yourself into the high schools. And so from a bridge class perspective, you can, through an articulation agreement, and I'm going to go back and I'll talk about that for a moment. So one of the first things that I started on at St. Joe's was an articulation agreement. The idea was to work with specific high schools. We did one with the Department of Education specifically for CTE high schools. So in one essential stroke of the pen on our end, we were able to create a relationship with about a dozen different high schools. And through that relationship, we are able to offer a certain number of credits based on their programs, because they're teaching things like Intro to Hospitality, they're teaching basic HTM courses. And so we committed to 6 credits being automatically accepted from those particular schools if those students fulfilled those curriculums on the high school side. Now, what Jeff is getting at is we created some bridge courses, which are dual enrollment, depending on where you are. And basically, the student can take a course taught by either a high school teacher who has the credentials, like we require that they have a master's to be able to teach on our behalf, and then we give them 3 credits. They actually pay, it's not free, they actually pay $275 or something along those lines, because I think it's $400, and then we give them a discount because they're an articulation school. They're one of our partner schools. We also waive the application fees for admissions. We also give them a discount on, I'm trying to think, there was one other thing, special programs that we might do. Basically, it boils down to a 25% discount for pretty much anything that we offer. But we don't give the classes for free, but we will accept their the work that they've done at the high school and give them credit for that. And it's portable. This is a big one. So if you're going to do something that gives high school students credits, make sure that it's credits that are portable that they could take to another institution. Yes, we want them to come to ours, but they may not always be able to make that work. St. Joe's, we're not cheap. There's the perception that they can't afford us, so it makes it a little bit more complicated, but then they could take those 6 credits and go to City Tech, for instance, and they would be very happy for that. And they may come back to us later for a master's degree or something because they appreciate it. Yes, so Frank asked about the qualifications. We require a master's degree in order to teach on our behalf, to do dual enrollment. Sometimes we will go in as faculty from the college and teach the course, but sometimes logistically that isn't the easiest thing to do. So we will work with them to basically certify one of the teachers on their campus to teach on our behalf. Excuse me one moment. All right. Any other questions about that? I'm going to share a couple of other things that you can do at the high schools. Actually, this is a good time that I am going to share a file. So, share file from my computer. There we go. All right, so this is the full article. You should all be able to see it. This has basically what we've been talking about. So another good question, Kirsten. So in terms of the calendar for high school, yeah, just like most places, once summer hits, people disconnect. I try to communicate with high school partners every couple of weeks, leading up to different programs and then following up on different programs. And so generally, if this was a normal semester, even as I'm wrapping up, this is finals week for my school, even as I'm wrapping up at St. Joe's, this is when things get actually a little bit busy for me with the high schools. This is when they want me to come in for Nocti. This is when they want me to come in to judge their cook-offs. And I generally, well, depending on the time of the year or the year, I will do something different in terms of the interview 360. How do these 6 credits? Okay, so Frank asked about the 6 credits. They don't have to do anything extra. We are just, like I will go in and I'll do a curriculum review with the high school. I'll go through with them their courses that they offer. And we will agree that as long as that qualifies for CT and it fulfills what the commission expects, the Culinary Hospitality and Tourism Commission, as long as the student meets that criteria, we agree to give 6 credits. And we generally give it as credit for 6 HTM elective credits. Because the reality is on our end, if they were to do that and then come to our school, we don't want them to not participate in Intro to Hospitality, because that's a great orientation course to have the students come in, get to know us, get to know the program. It's not just orientation to hospitality and tourism, it's also orientation to your department and to the faculty and et cetera. So we generally give it as 6 elective credits. Some of the other things that we do at the high schools, and I've mentioned a couple of these, getting on their advisory boards. Okay, so I sit on 4 advisory boards right now. And basically what that means is that once a term, once every month and a half, 2 months, you're gonna go on to the high school and you're gonna spend time with them. And sometimes you're doing a curriculum review, sometimes you're working on some career event. Oh, Ruth isn't in the call? She was before. Okay. Sorry, Ruth. So you'd go in during these advisory boards. On one advisory board, we help put on their job fair. On others, I've gone in and we've done an overall review of their program. And so there's different opportunities to go in. I've mentioned college fairs, career events, in addition to the special programs. And then I will say that, and this is one that isn't widely done, but the field trips that I organize for my students, I have gone an extra step and I've invited the high schools to participate. So when we organize something, we make it known to the different high schools and then they can coordinate on their end to join us. Now there's a little bit of a risk management issue here, so you need to make sure that they're doing what they need to do on their end so that their students are covered during that field trip. But it makes for a really good opportunity for interaction. One, they get to be there with your students and get to know them a little bit. And you're lightening their load. You're giving them an opportunity that they didn't otherwise have. And one example was the TWA hotel. We did 2 trips. The first trip was just my students. The second trip was our students, but I invited the high schools, and I had 3 high schools join us. And that was an opportunity of a lifetime for them. They got to see something that was so unique and so special that not everybody gets to see. So you have these opportunities to not only lighten their load, but also create a unique experience. And they'll always remember your institution because you brought that to them. Partner benefits, I already mentioned a couple of things. I'm going to come back to that in a second, Jeff. In terms of the articulation agreements, the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, you can craft that any way that you think works or as far as your institution will allow. Very simply on our end, we want to make sure that they don't have to pay an application fee to try to get into our school, giving them a discount on bridge courses, dual enrollment, giving them an opportunity to get credits through us. Those are all things that you can put together to make it easier for them. When they want to participate in something on campus, you can basically either roll out a red carpet or you can make it complicated. Don't make it complicated. Make it really easy, do the hustling on your end, and provide that opportunity for them if you can. Couple other notes about partner benefits is that it's not just benefits for the students, but it's also benefits for the teachers. So you may organize something that would qualify as PD or professional development for the teachers, the administrators, the guidance counselors, something that you host on your campus. You can organize something just for them because remember, you're not just improving the relationship or creating the relationship with the school. You're doing it with individuals who have individual needs. These teachers are trying to get promoted and trying to move up the ladder. And so if you can do something that moves them along, they're always going to be thankful for that. And they're always going to think of you when an opportunity comes up. So you have those things that you can do from a partner perspective that may be different depending on where you are. So let me answer Jeff's question. Yes, so completely agree. There are some guidance counselors, again, this is a very personal thing in the sense that you may connect with some people better than others at the high schools. At one high school, you might be like this with the assistant principal for whatever reason. You may be really close with the teachers at another school. You might be really close with the guidance counselor at another school. So we have one school, probably the first relationship that I created with a high school and my present institution her name's Allison, and she's at Erasmus High School, AOHT. And so that just came out of her just deep, connection to St. Joe's and wanting to work with us. And she opened the door for a lot of other opportunities, and she helped create the relationships with the teachers and the other administrators. So and that's why I keep a list of not just CTWB out work-based learning, career technical, not just them, but also the guidance counselors, the assistant principals, the principals, because you never know who's actually going to get the information and pass on the information. I try to create relationships where I can, and sometimes it's more effective through the counselors than it may be the teachers, and vice versa. So you just have to work through it. So, and I will say that one of the, speaking of partner benefits, out of my budget, and some of you might remember this, I've paid for the membership in CHRIE for 2 of my high school partners. So that gives us a total of 3, I think, in the organization now. So funding sources. Speaking of which, how do you pay for these relationships? How do you pay for the programs that bring the high schools on? I think that this is just a normal thing because I know how we can all operate, but we all have relationships with people in the industry. So if you work at this over time and you create signature programs, let's take Airline Expo for instance. You can get industry partners to pay for it, okay? If you don't have the budget, you can talk to your colleagues and say, hey, is there anybody that would like to help us out with Airline Expo this year? And you do it well in advance and you cultivate the relationship. I had a lot of success early on with HARRI, H-A-R-R-I, if you know HARRI. When they just got started, got to know the CEO, got to know the team pretty well. And so they actually helped us coordinate with different restaurants in New York City to feed our students during our events. The speakers themselves, I've only paid one speaker in the last 4 years. So as a result, it's not coming out of my budget, most of this stuff. It is coming through relationships. It's calling up the meatball shop and saying, hey, we're doing this great thing for high school students. Would you like to help out? Their food costs on their end are minimal. I mean, there's something, but they're minimal compared to the value of being able to, you know, shape young minds. And so you can find a way to get someone to be a panelist, to participate in one of the things that you're doing, and then, oh, hey, yeah, they're also feeding everybody. So that's one angle. I'm lucky enough to have a foundation account, kind of a foundation account. It's not that much. It's a lot more than I've had in the past, but it's $3,000 each year. $3,000 each year, which is just for Institute of Hospitality and Tourism Management programming. And so that can go a very long way if you hustle a little bit. Again, that's just the way that I operate. I don't just contract with the caterer on campus. I will do a little bit through them, and then I will go to Restaurant Depot and get the chips, the fruit, the water, everything else. And so that keeps my budget very, very low per program. Now it's easy to spend money if you have it, but if you work some of those angles, you're providing a benefit to the business, you know, whether it's the meatball shop or otherwise, and you're also providing an opportunity for exposure to the students, to that team. So it's a win-win in both directions. But I think there's a lot of money out there that people don't tap, and half the time it's just a matter of asking. And you're not talking about thousands of dollars. If you're talking about enough food to feed 100 high school students, that's not a big deal for most restaurants. I mean, right now it's really a big deal, but it's manageable. We've talked a little bit about high school realities in terms of what they have to deal with. I've already mentioned this to some extent, but they don't have the resources that colleges and universities do. They only have so much to work with. And again, if you can lighten their load and provide them opportunities, what's sad to me sometimes is that students come, college students come in and they say they've never had a field trip. And I'm like, well, didn't you go to, yeah, well, we just didn't go on field trips, because they don't have the bandwidth. And depending on the teacher that you're working with, they either do have the energy or they don't have the energy. And they may not be in a position to put things together. And let's just be real. Some people don't have the skill set to program. They don't have the skill set to put things together. You know, I do. And I've been doing it for a while, and I know that it's of value to the high schools, and it gets them to remember us. And it's absolutely worth it. It is painful sometimes. It's a lot of work. This Nightlife Academy on Friday has been a semester in the making. The other benefit here, and it's not about high school realities, but this is a great way of closing the loop on some of the things we do with our students. So knowing that I wanted to do a Nightlife Academy this semester, I used our special topics course to do a nightlife management course. And so the idea was all through the semester, we would be building up to the program that we're offering on Friday to mainly high school students and our college students. So it allowed our students, our college students, to work on a program that was actually real, not just busy work, and they get to develop their network by reaching out to people in the nightlife industry. And that's not just, clubs and lounges, it's also the vendors, it's also food and beverage, entertainment, etc. And so you have that opportunity to do some special things. So where I can, I will do a special topics course that leads into a particular event. Our food and beverage course led into Not So Scary Foods. So that seems to work pretty well. Again, you just close that loop. Ruth, I love it. But yeah, then again, it's one of those approaches that I like to take, which is try to go out on the fringe. Nobody talks about nightlife management. Cornell does it a little bit, but most programs don't address nightlife. It's kind of like, ooh, that's nightlife, but people should. And so we're doing a whole academy on it. And I have panelists from all over the world that are going to be speaking. And so the students are going to get a very cool experience. I talked about some of the specific programs. Art in a Bottle is one that I didn't mention, which was all about the marketing and business behind beverage and condiment brands. We also did one, we heard from the high school students that they were really curious about blockchain technology. And even though that's not core to HTM, they said it, so we worked with it. And so that was an opportunity for me to collaborate with my computer science colleague on campus, and we put together a blockchain symposium. And we got a completely different slew of students, high school students, 7 different high schools that had never been on campus. And they were excited because we were talking about IT and technology. And we brought in people from New York that were knee deep into blockchain projects, and they were at each table with all the students, and we worked on different ideas. It was a great experience. One, you also got to expand the programming to another department, but it also gave a completely different set of high schools the awareness of your institution. And some of them had probably never heard of St. Joe's before. So those are just some examples. Return on investment. I would say that it's not an overnight thing. And the next slide talks about data. So I'll do those all in one. You have to track everything that you do, or you should track everything you do. Every time we do one of these programs, we collect information about the high school students through interest cards, or on Friday, they actually have to RSVP. And then that's information we turn over to admissions. I copy a lot of that information into my own database so that I have a contact list for all of the high school students that have come to campus. And then I follow up with them to let them know about future programs. And I also just kind of check in with them to say, oh, where are you going to school in the fall? It's a little bit of that recruitment feel. It's your lead list. So ultimately, in terms of the money that I've spent and the effort that I've put forth in terms of the programs, it has produced a number of students that have come in that probably wouldn't have come into our program. Not just my program, but just the school. Some of the students that come in for something that we host on campus, or go to a panel that we host on a high school campus, they may not end up in HTM. They may not end up in your hospitality and tourism program, recreation program, food science program. They may not. But they might end up in your institution because they got a taste of what your institution has to offer and it was something that they liked. And so ultimately, it doesn't matter whether they come into your program or not. I mean, you want them to, but your institution, from a budget perspective, should be happy that you're adding students. And so that's why it's important to track that information, because your admissions team should be able to say, oh yeah, this is when the student first got a taste of the institution, and then they came for this, and then they came for this, and then they enrolled. And so you have that data then, which you can use to justify additional resources, because if you can do it at this level, well, maybe you could do it at this level. And so that's super important. So tracking the numbers from semester to semester, seeing where the trends are, and then you just tweak. You tweak each time to make sure that you're doing everything that you can on your end. Now, this sounds like a full-time job. It is. But I see it as very much a part of the job of being, chair or program director. Now, you guys don't have to just put stuff in the chat. You guys can speak up. I'm pretty much done with my, yeah, there you go. I'm done with my slides, so I'd love to just take questions and just have a conversation for the rest of our time together.
Hi, I have a question.
Yeah.
Since I work on the road like you have right now, but not chairperson before, high schools normally they limit the times for an institution to visit. How do you get around with that?
I think this is similar to the question before. Bye, Suzanne. It's not our responsibility to figure out the timing. If it's their rules and their protocols, and then they want us on campus, bye, Maria, they have to figure out how to get us on campus for more time. Thanks, Kirsten. So I've never run into that issue, honestly, because I'm not the one that's doing the asking to go on the campus. They're actually reaching out to me to say, can you come on campus? So they're figuring out whatever those protocols are. Are they limiting time because they want to give a fair chance to different colleges?
That might be a case, but my experiences was, they say, I'm from Sri Lanka University, but this is not happening in Sri Lanka yet because I'm new there. I don't know what's going on and how to do it. But the university I had before was in Oklahoma. They limit, say, 2 visits per college per semester. Wow. So if I go once, then they eliminate that one chance for the university I'm from. That means if I go there once, then my university will become like one left if I do that.
Yeah, and your admissions team would not be happy with that.
That's true. And also, every time I go, I ask my admissions office or my own college if they have any, say, giveaway souvenir thing, like little piece, like pencils or things like that, where kids can remember us. So every time I go, I ask for those, and they knew you are going.
Yeah.
That's why I got cut and say, hey, no, you cannot do that.
Well, one way around that, honestly, is just to focus more on bringing them to campus versus you going to their school. And the other benefit there is that if they're on your campus, you can figure out whatever that time looks like. You can figure out what kind of interaction they have with students and facilities and different things. And then that doesn't violate their quota for how many visits can take place. I haven't run into that, honestly. There are some schools that I'm on campus 5 times a semester.
Wow.
But that's just because they're inviting me. I'm on their advisory boards. Maybe there's a difference. Maybe they don't count meetings as being that visit versus maybe a college fair or a presentation of some kind. So I think you just have to work that out with them. But I would focus more on bringing them to campus, because then you get to, I think that there's a bigger value for bringing them on campus in terms of enticing the student to want to come to school. Versus you going on their campus, the only thing that they see if you go to their school is you. And you could be very enticing for them to want to go to your school because of your visit, but you can make I think you can make a much better impact, bigger impact if you bring them to your campus. That's just my thought.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Frank, it's Ruth.
Hi, Ruth.
Frank. Hey, hi, everybody. Sorry, I'm in my office. Hi.
Hi.
Frank, I have a suggestion. Just like Damien said, every high school teacher is different in what they need from you as a higher ed administrator. So I found a couple of times that I would go and do mock interviews, but only at one school because another school wouldn't do mock interviews, or resume writing. So there's a variation. You just have to figure out which professor needs what from you. And hopefully, like Damien said, that won't tie into one of the two visits. And then I always know who my alumni from those high schools are, and I bring them with me. And that's a pretty good lead in. I also, when I highlight them on my campus, or my former campus, I highlight the high school that they graduated from, or the program that they graduated from, especially if they were culinary or hospitality. So just a couple tips. Hopefully it helps.
Thanks, Ruth.
Thank you, Ruth.
Yeah, that's a good approach. Yeah, if you have alumni, it's always a big one if you can make that work somehow. Any other questions, thoughts?
So sorry, David, I have a question for you.
Sure.
With COVID-19 and all what's going on, when you were talking about money and sponsorship, and I know prior to what's happening, it might have been a little bit easier. What are your strategies post-coronavirus on trying to approach your key relationship contacts for money?
So now I made it almost through the entire presentation without mentioning COVID-19, which I think is pretty crazy. I think the reality is you just have to, more than anything, reach out to them as people and don't ask about any money. Don't ask about any sponsorships. It's just not, I mean, it's important right now. I mean, because we still have to do things, but I think you have to be human first, and the money will be there when things settle. You know, when they settle, things will resume some type of normalcy, and the money will be there. But I'm of the opinion that we just can't count on it right now. Most of my contacts with industry people over the last couple of months has been just to check in on them and see if they're okay. You know, and I'm doing the same thing with my high school partners, and I'm not asking about anything else. I'm not saying, hey, can you know, well, for the most part, and I'll share the rest in a moment. I think just see how they're doing. Now, if you absolutely are desperate for that money, if you really need that money to survive, if it's a big revenue stream for your program, then, you know, just be honest and say, look, I know this isn't a great time. I know that, you know, this is the last thing that's on your mind because of everything that's going on. But how are you feeling about the financial commitment that you've made? That's a tough conversation, but just be upfront and front load it with how are you and care about them first. And I think that's probably the best way to approach it. I will say that I've made a lot of adjustments because of how things are right now and going into the fall. The program that we're offering on Friday isn't costing us a dime, not a single penny, but the outcome could be huge from a high school perspective, because I've been connecting with the high schools for the last 2 months, letting them know that this is still going on and that the value is still going to be at a very high level. And my partners, the reality is the people that are panelists for this, these are all people that are actually, you're giving them a stage to go on, to do something with their time, to feel like they still matter, even though their venue's closed. So I think that the best thing to do is to evaluate each individual relationship and figure out how you can come at them. If they're a difficult person to begin with before COVID-19, you might want to approach them a little bit differently. But some of our partners, I just reach out, I kept talking to them, but my first concern was their well-being versus what they can do for me. I don't know if that really answered your question, but I know that at least the result, I have just as many people participating in the panels this Friday as I would have if it was a normal program, I think. Any other questions, concerns, thoughts, ideas? I know some of you have to run, which is totally fine, but I'm going to stick around if you want to chat. No, thank you, Ruth. Any other questions? All right. Well, if there are no questions, I will consider this a wrap. Thank you very much for participating, and we will post the recording on the CHRIE website, and we'll put it out there for NENA as well, for those of you that are part of NENA. Thank you so much. Be safe, be well. Take care. Bye, everybody.